To all audience, please stand up. Welcome Mr. Iwan Taruna and Faculty of Medicine, University of Jember. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu,
Shalom,
Namo Buddhaya,
salam kebajikan,
dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Salam Agromedis. The Honorable Dr. Haji Emil Elisdianto Dardak, Bachelor of Business, Master of Science, as the Vice Government of East Java.
Dr. Insinyur Iwan Taruna, Magister of Engineering IPM, as the Rector of University of Jember.
Also, we welcome Dr. Supangat, Master of Health PhD, Pediatric Surgery Specialist, as the Dean of Faculty of Medicine, University of Jember, and all of the Vice Dean that have joined us today.
Also, Dr. Hairudin, Master of Health, as the Chairman of 4th Icatd.
We also welcome our distinguished guest, Professor Kelly J. Donham, Master of Science, Doctor in Veterinary Medicine, Diplomats of the American College of Veterinary Prevention.
Professor Susan Alin Bramby, Graduate Diploma in Women's Studies, Master of Healthcare Management, PhD.
And Professor Peter Lundquist, PhD, who have kindly joined us via Zoom meeting.
Our treasured lecturer, staff, and students of Faculty of Medicine, University of Jember.
Also, all participants and audience that have joined us via this venue or via Zoom meeting. Good morning and welcome to today's event, the 4th International Conference on Agromedicine and Tropical Diseases, Emerging Viral Disease and the Challenges in Agromedicine. Let us introduce ourselves. My name is Gesi Oktanabila.
And my name is Ilmi Zabhak, as the Master of Ceremony for today. And we also would like to thank to our sponsorship, Center of Excellence of Agromedicine, University of Jember, and Islamic Development Bank for today's event.
Before we start our agenda, let me deliver the structure of today's event as follow: the opening,
Welcoming speech,
the keynote speech,
plenary lecture,
and the last parallel session. The first agenda is the opening, which will take place as we sing Indonesia's national anthem, and followed by the UNED hymn.
All ladies and gentlemen, please stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please be seated. Now, we will listen to the opening remark. The first speech will be presented by the chairman of 4th Icatd. I will now invite Dr. Hairudin to deliver welcoming speech.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning everyone. Good night for Professor Kelly. Honorable Rector of Universitas Jember, Dr. Insinyur Iwan Taruna, Master Engineering IPM, Honorable Dean Faculty of Medicine and Vice Dean, all speakers, respected members of Persatuan Agromedis Indonesia, very warm greeting to all the participants of this conference. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to the 4th International Conference of Agromedicine and Tropical Diseases. Established in 2000, the Faculty of Medicine Universitas Jember has reached heights of great success. Our faculty was established with a vision to become an educational institution that excels in agromedicine. We focus more on health and behavioral problems related to all activities and the consumer of agricultural products. Our target is to become an agromedicine center in Southeast Asia by 2025. This conference was held to support the achievement of this vision. The Icatd is held regularly every 2 years to support and improve research in agromedicine so that it can make a real contribution to improving the welfare of farmers and their families. The increasing incidence of emerging viral diseases in recent years is a challenge for us to develop strategies to prevent, treat, and control emerging viruses with high epidemic potential. Therefore, discussion about emerging viral diseases, epidemiology, and virus efforts to increase body immunity through herbal ingredients and vaccine development must be carried out to address existing and future emerging viral diseases. So, we want to rise to this challenge through this conference with the theme Emerging Viral Disease and its challenge in the agromedicine field. This conference will be held hybrid and on September for 2 days, 13, 14, 2022 via Zoom meeting and offline in the meeting hall of the Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Jember. In this 2-day conference, we will discuss many things related to the theme and this conference, such as respiratory disease in the agricultural area, agromedicine policy for health problem, viral epidemiology, herbal development, and update on emerging viral infection and vaccine development. Like the previous 3 Icatds, we have invited experts who will share their views, experiments, expertise, and talk on the topic. We sincerely hope this conference will also be a great success like other years, and we ask for your support to make it a memorable and successful event. I hope you all find this conference highly engaging and fruitful and feel enriched with knowledge after the completion of this event. I welcome you to the meeting and hope you all will have a great time. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thus, the speech delivered by Dr. Hairudin. Thank you to Dr. Hairuddin for the amazing speech. Next, we would like to invite Director of University of Jember to deliver the speech and officially open the 4th Icatd. Please welcome Dr. Insinyur Iwan Taruna, Master of Engineering, IPM.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning. But I know since the audience also coming from everywhere, that may be having different time, right? Like in the US, we should say good evening, and in other places supposed to be good afternoon. Please allow me, at the beginning of my speech, to invite all of you to be grateful to the Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who bless us the health in this morning, that make us are able to join in participating in the, we call it a 4th International Conference on Agromedicine and Tropical Diseases. Honorable Program Committee, speakers, dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the University of Jember, it is actually my very great honor to welcome you to this conference in this morning that organized by the Faculty of Medicine, University of Jember. We know right now and feeling also that the pandemic situation is getting better in Indonesia especially. Well, however, we carry out this event, we call it like hybrid method. Yeah, it may be due to several reasons or some reason, such as variation of current pandemic situation among the area in Indonesia also a little bit different, and also among the countries in the world. Possibly it is making, maybe a little bit worry for the delegates to travel overseas or travel from their city. Or the other reason, there have been a change on the majority of participants or delegates that they, what we call it, we prefer, tend to like doing conference as it is. But I hope it will not be, what we call it, being totally like this, or like, well, because we are a human being, still need to talk each other while taste a cup of a good coffee, in real world, not in the online world. So, for in this morning, I also want to offer my deepest gratitude that I like to deliver to Mr. Chairman, Dr. Hairuddin, and also to the steering committee, Dr. Supangat as a dean, and also supporting by the vice, Dr. Ancha, Dr. Husna, and Dr. Bagus, who makes contribution that make today a reality. And then I would like to extend my special warm welcome also to all very important invited speakers who will talk about the special and timely topics during this conference. The committee written the general topic as emerging viral diseases and the challenges in agromedicines. On my note, especially for today's session, we will have Professor Kelly Donham from the Iowa University, right? And then the Deputy Governor of East Java Province, Dr. Emil Darda. Then there will be also Professor Susan Alison Bramby from Deakin University, Australia, and then Professor Peter Lundqvist from Swedish University of Agricultural Science. So it is very complete, invited speaker coming from everywhere from the globe. Yeah. Appreciate to committee who invite them. Our great thanks to all invited speakers because they kindly willing to share their expertise and experience in this forum. Ladies and gentlemen, I think everybody know that this conference are aiming to provide a forum for presentation and discussion among scientists, researchers, clinical practices and students from several countries who work in the areas of agromedical field, especially on subtopic as we know from the conference flyer. There are topic respiratory disease, mental health, herbal development, etc. So I think this is very important topic that such discipline actually has played important role in the recent world development of health. Yeah. So the increasing incidence of emerging viral disease in recent years, some time ago, like COVID-19, is in fact a challenge for every country to develop strategies to prevent, treat, and control emerging viruses. So it is hence very, very important for us to discuss about emerging viral diseases, epidemiology, and virus controls. Effort to increase body immunity and vaccine development in order to deal with the existing and future emerging viral diseases. In view of that, I, on behalf of the University of Jember, is very happy and proud that University of Jember to be a part of this scientific network. We consider this conference as a big event, so we expect also it is will will strengthen further steps of the University of Jember toward a world-class university. As I mentioned regularly like that, right? I do encourage this kind of activity, and then because it is relevant, to the unit vision and mission, especially for unit mission, who I expect to be the excellent university in development of science, technology, and art, with insight of environmental sustainability, business and industrial agriculture. Therefore, we hope that fund also are able to promote extended opportunity in research collaboration between lecturers in UNEDs, especially in the field of agromedicine, with other researchers from the abroad, from other university abroad. Finally, I hope all scientific paper also produced and shared during this conference will inspire us to be more productive and also enable improvement of our work. Well, once again, on behalf of the University of Jember, I'd like to sincerely apologize should there be inconveniences that may occur before, during, or after event. May Allah SWT bless us with a very good. Ya Rabbal Alamin. I wish you have a good and enjoyable days. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Iwan Taruna, for the great speech and open this event officially.
We also welcome Mr. Iwan. If you have any schedule after this, we welcome you to continue this activity. Thank you, Mr. Iwan. Next session. All right. All right, the next session is the documentation.
To offline documentation for Rector of University of Jember, Dean and all of Vice Dean in University of Jember, Chairman of the 4th Icatd, please join us to the front and to take documentation together.
Okay. The documentation will start in 3, 2, 1. Once more, 3, 2, 1. Okay, with agromedicine sign, documentation starts in 3, 2, 1. Once more. Okay. All right. Okay, once more, thank you very much, Mr. Iwan, for joining us today. Next session is the keynote speech that will be delivered by Dr. Haji Emil Elistianto Dardak. The committee, please show us the curriculum vitae of Mr. Emil. Dr. Haji Emil Elistianto Dardak, Bachelor of Business, Master of Science, was born in Jakarta at 20 of May in 1984. He is the only Asian representative among 40 elected mayors worldwide at Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative Fellowship in 2018. He started his career as media analysis consultant at Ogilvy in Jakarta in 2001 until 2003, and now became a vice government of East Java from 2019 until present. Without any further ado, to Mr. Emil, we welcome you to deliver the speech.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. A very good morning to all participants of this conference on emerging viral diseases and the challenges in agromedicine, organized by the Faculty of Medicine, University of Jember. First of all, allow me to greet the Rector of Universitas Negeri Jember, Bapak Dr. Iwan Taruna, the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Bapak Dr. Supangat, PhD, the Vice Deans, and all the academics, faculty members, committee and students of the Faculty of Medicine and participants of this conference, including all keynote speakers, both from Indonesia and abroad. We have Professor Kelly Donham, Professor Susan Allison Brumby, Professor Peter Lundqvist, and later on we have from overseas Professor Chihaya Koriyama, and also Professor Amin Subandrio from Indonesia, Fatima May Tesoro, Dewi Nur Aisyah, and everyone joining this conference. First of all, allow me to congratulate the committee for organizing this international conference. Indeed, it is very encouraging to learn that universities in East Java are becoming more globally connected by means of organizing international conferences. This is indeed a very good use of the existing technology, because exchange of knowledge and collaboration in research is made possible by the use of information technology, by the use of video. And as such, I believe that this is a very important starting point for us to be more optimistic about the advancements of knowledge and quality of higher education and research as we see more and more international conferences are being organized. And allow me to very briefly share a bit about our understanding on the emerging viral diseases. As we all know, we are still in the midst of trying to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. And although the fact is that cases have gone down and severity of cases have also become much less given the vaccination and probably the strengthening immunity of the people, and probably as concluded or probably scientifically assumed that there is also a more weakening of the virus as it starts to mutate and go weaker, and hopefully we can already see it as becoming endemic instead of a pandemic. Now, next slide, please. We know that there are many communicable diseases. This include, we all know that there was the swine flu, the SARS and MERS, and we also face some diseases that are communicable and also still happening today, like malaria, dengue fever, and we have other vector-borne diseases. And also from other parts of the world, we know there is Ebola and other fevers. And also, I think quite recently, we have what they call as usually chicken pox, but this time somehow they call it monkeypox. I don't know what's the exact medical. We call it cacar monyet or monkeypox. So we need to be very mindful. It is a bit interesting to note that approximately just not more than 4 years ago, when I was serving as a mayor and we had a discussion with the Ministry of Health. A lot of our budget and resources are focused towards non-communicable diseases. There is an increasing prevalence of diseases such as diabetes, and then also hypertension, and we're also seeing heart diseases and cancer, and also as such, including liver disease. And as such, a lot of our resources, including health facilities, have been focused towards addressing non-communicable diseases. And when COVID-19 actually started its outbreak, then we need to quickly re-equip our hospitals, our personnel with the capability to respond to communicable diseases or viral diseases. It is actually quite important to note that this impact in both aspects. First of all, it reduces our resources to expand our capacity to deal with non-communicable diseases. But second, it strengthens our readiness to anticipate any such diseases in the future. We hope that we're not only prepping ourselves for COVID, but we have to always be mindful that any communicable diseases that will suddenly have its outbreak in future, we need to have a system in place, both the health system and the prevention system in the society, to avoid such diseases from spreading beyond control. Next. Now, a couple of factors that are believed to contribute to infectious disease include human demography and behavior. The more people are traveling, the quicker the disease travel. Technology and industry, economic development and land use, again, international travel, microbial adaptation, breakdown of public health measures, human susceptibility to infection, climate, ecosystem, poverty, war and famine, lack of political will, and intent to harm. But I'd like to add one more thing. I think we are aware of zoonosis, diseases that actually spread from animals to human beings. And the pattern or the cuisine, people eating behavior, as well as the addressing issues of biosecurity are also very important in addressing potential animal transmitted disease that spread to human being. Next. Now, the emergence include agents like pathogenic infectious agents. There may also be resistance on prescribing practice, non-adherence by patients who actually consume medicines not in line with the prescription, counterfeit drugs, and the use of anti-infective drugs as well in animals and plants, or this can also be chemical pesticides, and the resistance of vectors to pesticides. Next. As for the host, the issue is the people where the host is the human demographic. They started inhabiting new areas, and then they're engaging in unsafe sexual practices that results in spread of HIV, gonorrhea, syphilis, and sexually transmitted diseases. The change in agricultural and food production patterns that results in foodborne infectious agents such as E. coli, increased international travel that usually relates with influenza. Also, immunosuppression, how people are actually becoming susceptible to infection, as well as the issue of poverty and social inequality that reduces human capacity to anticipate diseases. Next, environment. Changing ecosystem, climate, deforestation. Animals are becoming more into contact with human beings as they start to lose their habitat, their natural habitats. And then also climate like El Nino, triggering natural disasters and outbreaks that worsens because of coinciding with certain climate, rainy season, malaria, cholera, and also global warming that further the spread of malaria, dengue, and others, including filariasis. Economic development and land use, urbanization, technology and industry, the use of technology for food processing and handling that may have its pros and cons, international travel, and also the lack of political will to be more vigilant in doing surveillance system. Next. A breakdown of public health measure, including war, unrest, overcrowding, pollution or contamination of major reservoirs, the lack of funding for health, and focusing more on curing diseases instead of preventing them also actually makes us less able to anticipate potential outbreaks and how to contain it. And of course, uncontrolled urbanization, population displacement, and lifestyle. Next. Now, in Indonesia itself, we know that we're a highly populated region, and East Java province is a highly populated, highly dense region with 40 million people living in 48,000 square kilometer of land. So it's very dense, probably one of the densest province in the world. And as such, I think it is very important that we actually improve our readiness to anticipate viral diseases. Now, let me talk a bit about Jember, the host of this conference. Next. As we all know that about 15% are farmers. Yeah, next slide. Okay. And 5% of them are actually farm workers, meaning they don't own the land and they work as laborers. Now, I would also like to commend and appreciate the Jember their research also on occupational occupational hazards and health hazards in the field of agriculture. Next. Because we also talk about the ecosystem just now that has an implication to the spread of viral diseases. This includes in the agriculture sector chemical hazards such as skin irritation, chemical poisoning, respiratory disorders, nutritional disorders, physical hazard, including fatigue, dehydration, and lung disorders, biological hazard, including diarrhea, animal bites, and infection. This can cause zoonosis or animal transmitted disease, ergonomic hazard resulting on posture during working, and of course, psychological hazard. Now, next. I think we also like to map what are the highest causes of death. It is still by far stroke, contributing 23.5%, followed by ischemic heart disease, cirrhosis, but then tuberculosis have fallen to 7th rank. Diabetes climbed from 7th to 4th. Diarrhea goes to the 6th, and COPD is about 5th. And then lung cancer is number 8. Infection in lower respiratory goes from 8th to 10th. And so we're seeing non-communicable diseases actually going out, while I think we are also seeing that there is the top 3 are still related to heart disease and stroke. Next. Now, I think we believe that occupational health effort has its contribution in creating or in increasing our resilience to possible viral disease, which is why it is important to actually develop ways to promote and to build more better understanding among the stakeholders on how to actually manage occupational health, including in agriculture, from counseling into workshops, including surveillance, certain protective gears and equipments, and building up treatment readiness for actually handling certain unexpected and unwanted cases. Next. Now, we have a number of centers for actually addressing occupational health hazard in agriculture. There are 11 stations in Jember. Altogether throughout East Java, there's about 258 occupational health stations for agriculture. Next also, this is a check called cholinesterase, which is to butyryl cholinesterase, which is to check whether there is an exposure of pesticide in the blood, traces in the blood of farmers, and because they use pesticides to control pests. Now, 5 cities have organized this. I believe actually more, but these are some of the data that have been submitted. Next also, it is important that we promote better nutrition as a way to increase the resilience of the people. Now with that, I think I'd like to conclude my presentation. Please turn off the presentation and Once again, I think this is a great opportunity to really exchange the current research and of course, the recent developments. COVID-19 has certainly opened our eyes on the issue of communicable disease. We hope it doesn't only focus on respiratory disease, but on all potential viral diseases, outbreaks, potential pandemic, which we hope will never happen again in future. But I think we always need to make sure that we are ready, because there's always that 0.001% chance that something as catastrophic as COVID may happen in the future. So with that, I'd like to conclude my opening remarks. Thank you very much. All the best for this international conference. Congratulations for Jember State University. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to Mr. Emil for the amazing keynote speech under the title Emerging Viral Disease and the Challenges in Agromedicine. Next, to the committee, please show e-certificate for Mr. Emil. All right, Mr. Emil, we're gonna take some documentation. Please be ready. All right, the documentation will start in 3, 2, 1. Once more with agromedicine sign, sir. All right, we're gonna start the documentation in 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you very much once more, Mr. Emil, for joining us today. If you have any schedule after this, we are welcoming you to leave the Zoom. Thank you, Mr. Emil.
Next session is second keynote speech that will be delivered by the Honorable Professor Kelly J. Dunham, Master of Science, Doctor in Veterinary Medicine, Diplomat of the American College of Veterinary Prevention. To the committee, please show the curriculum vitae of Professor Dunham.
Are you ready for me to open my PowerPoint presentation?
All right, sir. Firstly, we're gonna read your curriculum vitae first. So for the committee, please show us the curriculum vitae of Professor Dunham.
All right, Professor Dunham is a professor of occupational and environmental health at the University of Iowa College of Public Health. He directs the Iowa Center for Agricultural Safety and Health, Icatd, and the Agricultural Health and Safety Training Core of the Heartland Education and Research Center, and is Deputy Director of the Great Plains Center for Agricultural Health, GPCAH. To talk about our next topic, with its title, Agricultural Respiratory Illness, we have outstanding keynotes right now. Please welcome Professor Dunham.
In the United States and Iowa. And I just want to get started here on the back up to the start here. Anyway, I wanted to really give my compliments to Indonesia and the establishment of this really fine conference, which is now, I think, in year 4. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for inviting me to be able to participate. I look forward to participating in the rest of the conference. So let me welcome you from Iowa, and let me say this, that I want to really make sure that my colleagues here, who I've worked with over the years, Susan Brumby and Peter Lundqvist, I welcome them, and they are really stars amongst the constellation of people that are interested in agricultural medicine and moving this whole science forward internationally. So thank you very much for your participation and for all of you who are on this conference right now. So let me make one point, and that is that we have put together a textbook. Actually, this is in the second version of this textbook, second edition, Agricultural Medicine. And so basically, what I know and what I'll present today is what I've written in this textbook, but it also covers the whole field of agricultural medicine, including infectious diseases and injuries and so on and so forth. So I commend that to you for additional information. So let me go on from here and let you see where I live here, and this is in Iowa, which is right there, right in the middle of the United States. You can see right south of Minnesota, right north of Missouri, and not too far from Chicago. But we are in a very highly agricultural state, one of the most intensive agricultural states in the United States. And it is that way back in 1955, my predecessors saw that our farmers were having a very hard time in terms of the injuries and illnesses that they were experiencing. And out of that then came what was called the Institute of Agricultural Medicine, which is this facility right here. Both Peter and Susan Brumby have visited us here at this institution. We do have within the College of Public Health, where this institute is located, and that is the University of Iowa. So just to give you a little bit of idea of where I come from and where I'm speaking from. So here are some big things that I'd like to hope that you take away from this talk today. And number one, in terms of talking about health problems, not injury problems, but health problems in agriculture, in my research, I find that respiratory problems are one of the most common and one of the most important occupational health problems in agriculture internationally. It doesn't make any difference where you're from, but it comes from almost every country. And then organic dust is the number one hazardous exposure that creates most all of these respiratory problems. And also, it's very uncommon to have an allergy. Most all of these problems from organic dust are basically inflammation. And that's the pathology of this organic dust, which we'll take on some additional discussion through this conference. And one of the major particular problems is organic dust toxic syndrome. I'm just wondering, somebody raise your hand if you're hearing me okay. Are you hearing me okay? Okay, let me know if sound isn't good. So, agricultural respiratory exposures and illnesses and disease risk. Respiratory illnesses, as I mentioned before, the most prevalent occupational health condition in farmers in most areas around the world where agriculture is done. 25% of those problems come from livestock-associated exposures, and 15% from grain farmers alone. Agricultural dust, as I've alluded to already, is really a universal exposure and causes universal health problems. There are some gases that are of concern from the standpoint of respiratory illnesses in agriculture: ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and nitrogen oxides. Fumigants, types of pesticides that are used as well. But in this presentation, I'm going to really focus just on the agricultural dusts, because otherwise it would take a whole day of lecture to cover all the broad aspects of agricultural respiratory diseases. So that's why I'm going to concentrate on dust exposures. Also, though, I will recognize there are gas exposures, as I've already indicated. There are infections that are of importance, and there are pesticides that are important that can cause respiratory diseases. Now, let me say that you see the size of the print here from very large to very small. And that intent to indicate that where most of the problems lie. So dust exposures first and followed by gas, followed by infections, followed by pesticides in terms of the risk and diseases that might result from these exposures. Now, one of the things I want to mention, and that is sort of a principle in toxicology, and that is concentration of exposure, and then, of course, the time that you are exposed. So one of the things that happens in agriculture, wherever you have an enclosure, a confined space, and there is a potential for organic dust in that space, and it's confined, you're going to have a greater problem in terms of resulting health problems. So keep that in mind. It's just a very principle of toxicology. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that, yeah, we're talking about dusts that are found in agriculture, but all dusts in agriculture are not created equal relative to their potential health effects. So here we have a combine creating a lot of dust, and most of this dust is soil that's been washed up on the plant surfaces and then gets distributed in the air. However, we have another situation where this is a moldy grain that's been stored, and it's because it was stored with too much moisture and has become quite moldy and a lot of bacteria as well as mold growing, and that is much more hazardous than this dust over here. So it's the microbial content of this organic dust that is the big problem. Now, also let me mention that throughout occupational injuries and respiratory diseases, silica and asbestos have been problems in certain types of occupations. However, it's not much of a problem in agriculture as we have found it. Yes, there are perhaps some areas where you find silica in the soil, fresh fractured silica that might get up on plant surfaces and get aerosolized as the plants are harvested. There might be some soils around the world that has asbestos in it. And similarly, if those soils get aerosolized, there could be a concern, but relatively it's a minor concern compared to the microbial content of that dust. So what are the sources of this agricultural dust? Well, animal products, and there's plant products. So feces and hair and feathers and urine and dander are present in many of those agricultural dusts, particularly, of course, in animal feeding operations. And in plant products, you have feed, you have pollen, you have insects, and then additionally you have soil particles, and where you have machines that are operated by diesel engines, you can have some diesel exhaust. So it's a multifactorial type of exposure. To think that it's not just one thing. So keep that in mind in terms of where the sources are coming from. Respiratory damage from dust to agricultural workers. What really happens? First of all, airway diseases are mainly due to inflammation and the airways themselves, that is, from the nostrils on down to the trachea and major bronchi, not the lung per se, not the lung tissue per se. It's mainly airways diseases. And the second thing then, that there is physical damage to these airway tissues. So you can, as you know, normally the whole airway is coated with this stratified columnar respiratory epithelium, has cilia on top, and that physical damage from those exposures can destroy that and then lead to greater damage to further on down the pathway of our respiratory tract. So you have physical damage to tissue and you have physical damage from the innate immune response. So because of the immune response that is normal, shall we say, in an individual, that results then from inflammation that results in some damage just from that immune response causing inflammation. But allergy is not very common in our agricultural workers, that from the standpoint of respiratory diseases, and caused mainly by the toxins, that is the components of that microbial components, the toxins therein in the agricultural dust. And I'll say this first, and I'll say it again, that whenever you have additional kinds of respiratory exposures like smoking, you're going to have a greater increased risk of problems, and you're going to have a greater risk of having severe problems in addition to what you might have. So hazards will increase with the degree of confinement, with the degree of microbial contamination. The more microbes there are in the dust that you breathe, the greater the potential risk of a hazard and disease. The length and concentration of exposures, as mentioned, that's sort of a basic toxicological principle. And also, a lot of times I hear that, well, you know, if particles aren't big enough to get into the lungs, it's not a problem. Well, I can tell you that the particles in agricultural dust are really quite large, 10 microns. It takes a particle about half that size, 5 microns, to get into the lungs itself. But these particles, being 10 microns and above, will impact anywhere on the respiratory airways and cause disease. And with the concurrent exposures, you're going to have a greater probability of having problems. Smoking, already mentioned. But ammonia, you have ammonia that might be present in some livestock operations, might be a component of fertilizer that's applied to the land for crops. And then I'll mention that there are some protective factors. First of all, early in life, there's so-called hygiene hypothesis that many of you may have heard about. And basically what that's about, first studied in farmers, or should I say farming students at the universities, and following them over a period of time, is that those that were exposed to livestock and to farm environments compared to their city dwellers had an innate protection from atopic asthma for a lifetime. So that's a protective factor if early exposure happens. And then genetics. So about 10% of the people have what I call an endotoxin gene, meaning that their toll-like receptors are not as responsive to endotoxin, and therefore they are not as likely to get sick from exposure to these organic dusts. So those are things that are sort of normal protective factors that I will mention. But here's the big thing in agricultural dusts, and that is high levels of microbes, as I mentioned, and the byproducts therein. And the king there for the byproducts is our gram-negative bacteria, like E. coli, for example. And those organisms, those gram-negative bacteria, meaning that they are that group of bacteria that will accept the gram stain, they have a cell wall that is made up of a component called endotoxin. And so that endotoxin is highly inflammatory substance. And that is what is kind of the root of a lot of the problems. There are other things in that organic dust. There's our glucans and peptidoglycans and proteinases. These are somewhat minor players, however, in the exposures that occurs from breathing organic dust. And other toxins and irritants that might be there, mycotoxins, which are produced from certain mold species, probably not a big factor overall. There are other allergens that might be, mites, roaches, their feces, tannins, glycatic acids, again, rather minor players in their effect on the respiratory tract relative to endotoxin. So organic dust, respiratory diseases in response to endotoxin, what does happen? Again, I'm going to mention for the third or fourth time is it rarely is it an allergic problem, that is an atopic allergic problem. And it's mostly inflammation set off by the innate immune system and the toll-like receptor system, causing inflammation and cell damage because of the innate immune system by itself. And then there is genetic variation, as already mentioned. It's this TLR genes, 10% of the population results in less response to endotoxins. And also, again, as I mentioned, it's just the particles themselves relative to whether or not there's endotoxin with them alone will cause damage to that respiratory epithelium, okay? Well, the agricultural organic dust respiratory disease complex. So let me talk about that. Respiratory disease complex caused by this organic dust. And there are 6 such conditions that I list in this complex. Some of them are chronic problems, some of them are acute. Several of them may occur simultaneously. You may get some of the acute problems as well as some of the chronic problems in the same patient. Specific conditions and severity vary according to time and concentration. And let me talk to you a little bit about that. First of all, a little bit more detail on this disease complex. So what are these 6, excuse me, what are these 6 things? First of all, again, just following where this dust impacts the respiratory tract. There's mucous membrane irritation, which is again from the nasal pharynx and the nasal septum all the way down to the pharynx. Is that respiratory epithelium, which can cause inflammation, and it can cause something very similar to rhinitis and sinusitis. May not be infectious, but caused by inflammation. You may see pharyngitis and laryngitis and tracheitis even. And this, again, is just because of the irritation of that upper portion of the airways. And then bronchitis. So that's inflammation a little bit further on down in the airways system. And it can be acute. In other words, lasting for maybe weeks. But if it lasts for more than a couple of years with cough and phlegm, now we're getting into something that's chronic bronchitis, which potentially over the long haul can lead to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. There is an asthmatic-like condition, not allergic necessarily. We can also call this a hyperresponsive airways or reactive airways disease. And that's a very common thing that we see as well. It's just very similar to, an allergic type asthma where you have the airways shrinking down upon exposure, making it difficult to get air out of the lungs. So that can happen, but it's not due to a specific allergic condition in most of these cases. It's due to inflammation. And then further on with this organic dust toxic syndrome, number 4 is a condition called organic dust toxic syndrome. Some have called it in the early phases of discovery or research on this disease, mycotoxicosis or silo unloader's disease or toxic alveolitis. But organic dust toxic syndrome is what most of the community has, research community has really decided to kind of come down and call it that, ODTS, organic dust toxic syndrome. So what is that? Well, what happens is that when you're exposed to a large amount of this organic dusts in about 2 to 4 hours, maybe up to 6 hours, you get sick. And it's typically just like you had a severe case of influenza. So you may have fever, you may have malaise, that is, you just feel terrible. You may have muscle aches and pains, and you may have difficulty in breathing. And then you get over it in 24, 48, maybe 72 hours. It may not lead to any specific long-term effect, but you might get sicker more easily with less exposure in the future. So that's organic dust toxic syndrome. Another potential acute problem is hypersensitivity pneumonitis, also called farmer's lung, also called extrinsic allergic alveolitis. Now, hypersensitivity pneumonitis acutely may look very similar in clinically speaking to organic dust toxic syndrome. You know, a severe fever, malaise, difficult breathing, muscle aches and pains, just feeling terrible. Now, there is, however, a chronic form of this hypersensitivity pneumonitis, and that's interstitial fibrosis. So once this situation occurs, and this does have an allergic basis, this hypersensitivity pneumonitis. If not corrected and the person is not properly protected from further exposures, can lead to an end-stage disease of interstitial fibrosis. And then finally, and I put 6 here because some people are allergic or can be allergic to these organic dusts, although not very common. May be the 6th sort of the less common thing that happens. So that's the 6 things that can happen from these different exposures, and the different types of reactions, which component of this 6 component syndrome you have depends on how concentrated the exposure is that you breathe and for how long. So let's talk first of all about the really periodic, very massive types of exposures where you get clouds of organic dust in the environment like this. And then the second potential problem, and you have a group of syndromes that are characteristic with a chronic but lower level concentration, like working in livestock confinement. So, example. Main health results from organic dust toxic syndrome. And just to review what I already said, there are flu-like symptoms of variable severity, 4 to 6 hours after exposure, recover in 24 to 72 hours. This could be in somebody who is working with rice harvesting or rice storage, for example, which I'm sure many of your farmers do. And then there's acute farmer's lung, as I mentioned. Rarely does this ever happen, but this is more of an allergic problem, but I will tell you about that. But where do these acute problems come from? At least in our environment, it's cleaning out grain bans. Again, you've got a highly contaminated source of grain. You've got an enclosed structure, so it's a perfect situation where you can get this high-level exposures. Or unloading a silo, for example, or shredding a bale, anything that will produce this dust, or power washing a building. I mean, in most agricultural operations now where there is livestock involved and housing, you will use a power washer, and you can expose and blast a lot of this organic dust material up into the air to be breathed. So health effects of chronic exposure, chronic lower level concentrations, well, bronchitis, and that can be acute, where you have phlegm intermittent associated with the work. That can go on to a chronic bronchitis, cough and phlegm that goes on for longer than 2 years. Then you can have this non-allergic asthma, which is chest tightness and wheezing upon exposure, and this mucous membrane irritation. So those are 4 things that can happen with this lower level concentration of exposure. And that might be grinding and mixing feed, for example, or it might be taking care of livestock, whether it's being poultry, for example, or dairy or cattle operations. So that's a problem. And now back to this condition that's called hypersensitivity pneumonitis or farmer's lung. This is, in fact, a lung tissue disease compared to All of the other conditions I've talked before are primarily airways disease. And it's an immune response to some inhaled microbes, some ones that are small enough to get down here in the lungs per se. And what happens is that the initial exposure, you will develop and sensitize your innate immune system so that the following exposure sometime down the line that you will get cells that come in, white cells that come in and try to encapsulate those microbes. And then that sets off this whole innate immune process, which really can make a person sick. So rare, we in our studies in our population, we see this less than 1% of the people who've ever had such a exposure or a condition like this, whereas this organic dust toxic syndrome, the ODTS, probably up to high as 30%. So chronic forms may be increased without symptoms to end-stage lung disease, as I mentioned. You may have an initial exposure, but if they're not protected, people are not protected after that. After they've had, you can have sort of a silent disease go on where you may not have initially many symptoms, but you are starting a process of building up into chronic interstitial fibrosis, and that obviously can be bad and lead to end-stage disease. Okay. So comparison of organic dust toxic syndrome and hypersensitivity. Well, first of all, if you just look at symptomology, they're similar, very similar in terms of the symptoms, flu-like symptoms of variable severity. But typically, the acute hypersensitivity pneumonitis or farmer's lung is more severe. And you might see changes you might see X-ray changes, for example. Not often do you see X-ray changes in organic dust toxic syndrome. And I'll show you some more differences that might sort these things out. Similarities, acute episodes appear similar, delayed 4 to 6 hours following exposure, and influenza-like with fever, myalgia, malaise, fatigue, headaches, chest tightness, and cough, so on. So as I say, they can look similar, at least on initial. And I've produced these tables that can help a person sort out between the two different types of exposures that may occur. Well, first of all, history, it's usually a heavy dust exposure with many epidemics, and hypersensitivity may be similar. But typically, one of the things is moldy hay or moldy grasses have been incriminated in those particular types of exposures. Prognosis: no known end-stage disease with organic dust toxic syndrome, but possible with hypersensitivity pneumonitis, as I've already mentioned, chronic interstitial fibrosis. And again, the cause of ODTS is toxic inflammatory, whereas HP is a delayed hypersensitivity, also classified as a type 4 immunologic response. The occurrence is like 20 to 25 to 30% of the farmers of ODTS, but rare, very rare is this HP. Clinical variable flu-like symptoms, similar to ODTS, but may be more severe symptoms. Appearance, fever, headache, respiratory symptoms, same, but again, may be much more severe with HP. There is a serological test which doesn't really work for ODTS. And there is a test for hypersensitivity to pneumonitis, but all that does is gives you a serology, positive or negative, to some of the usual bacteria that are incriminated in this condition. But it's not diagnostic. And then I mentioned X-rays usually negative for ODTS, but you can often see it infiltrate on X-rays with hypersensitivity pneumonitis. The PFT, for example, you see ODTS, you see a obstructive pattern in pulmonary function testing, whereas HP, you see a restrictive function, meaning that you can't, your lungs won't collapse well enough to get the airflow out. and it's just the opposite for ODTS. You can't get the air in. And then partial pressure of oxygen is usually normal, but often low with HP. And the cellular response is neutrophilia, usually for ODTS, but often, at least later on, mononuclear response for HP. So those are things that may help you differentiate that. Probably the best way to help differentiate that is by alveolar lavage and looking at the particular cell types. Again, where with HP, you would see more mononuclear cells. And if it was just ODTS, you would see more neutrophils. So I wanted to follow up and say that, you know, typically we oftentimes in a clinical response, a clinical approach, think about one exposure, one disease. That's not the case with agricultural dust. You may have a number of these things all going at the same time. You may have asthma-like syndrome, you may have organic dust toxic syndrome and bronchitis, upper airways inflammation. So it's a syndrome that you see, and it's not perhaps just one thing, but oftentimes a lot of these different symptomologies all come together and difficult to sort out. What about treatment? Well, of course, in preventive medicine, prevention of exposure is the biggest thing. And that, first of all, is to learn about, you know, how the exposure occurs and develop, you know, some sort of process by where workers and farmers are not exposed or not exposed as severely. And then, of course, protection. And I'll talk a little bit about use of respirators. Symptomology, if you're going to symptomatic, if you're going to have to treat somebody, just you would treat them almost similarly if somebody had regular asthma, you know, with bronchodilators and anti-inflammatories, steroidal mainly. And usually they will respond just as, even if it was, you know, just as if it was an atopic asthma. For ODTS or farmer's lung, steroids or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are fine, and you may have to use a balanced electrolyte or fluid replacement to correct the acid-base balance. And for hypersensitivity pneumonitis, again, future important, after they've had one episode of this, future exposure prevention is essential to protect the health of that person long-term. All right. So I put this slide here together just as sort of a summary of this organic dust and the conditions that it might cause. So again, if you have a chronic lower level of exposure to this organic dust, you have a non-allergic inflammation, which may result in this mucous membrane irritation, bronchitis, or asthma-like condition where the airways tighten down. You may have an allergic condition, and that one may be an atopic, but very rare asthma, or it might go into chronic hypersensitivity pneumonitis, again, which is very rare. And then the concentration and length of exposure, again, if it's periodic, acute, high levels of exposure, you have non-allergic inflammatory causes. So the big thing there, as we've talked about in summary, is this organic dust toxic syndrome. And then could be an allergic condition, and that could be acute hypersensitivity pneumonitis. So that sort of encapsulates this complex syndrome that you have of organic dust toxic syndrome. Now let's move a little bit away from dust, and I will just mention a couple of things about some other exposures, and particularly remember confined space. Whenever you have a confined space, whether it's grain storage or livestock, buildings or whatever, you're going to have a greater potential for having exposure that can be harmful. So in some situations, and I have to say that this is probably not a problem yet in Indonesia or in many countries of Southeast Asia, and that is what we call in in very intensive livestock operations where you have a lot of animals in buildings that are held quite intensive, and you have to do something with all of the manure. And if it's in liquid systems, if it's in liquid systems, you have exposure to ammonia. And if it's in deep systems, you might have anaerobic systems. If you have a liquid system that's like this system right here, for example, this is a pit that holds up to maybe 10 feet of this liquid manure. Well, that's just perfect for hydrogen sulfide. A little bit of methane, that's not poisonous, but hydrogen sulfide is. And let me just talk very briefly about hydrogen sulfide. And again, I'm not for sure whether this is an issue of concern in Southeast Asia at this point, but it may be in the future, just because it's kind of an increasing style of livestock production worldwide, where you have intensive housing and management of manure in a very intense form. So what happens is that because you don't have enough oxygen in those systems, then the bacteria in those systems uses sulfur as a source of electrons. And the reduced sulfur then is hydrogen sulfide. And that's an extremely cellular toxin. It's an extreme irritant. It has a predilection for the central nervous system. It paralyzes the sense of smell so that you can't, so it's not a warning. I mean, a typical smell is rotten eggs of hydrogen sulfide, but you can't smell it because it paralyzes the sense of smell in higher levels. But in high levels, it can cause sudden unconsciousness, respiratory cessation, and pulmonary edema. And death. And I've investigated over, I think 25 different situations where farmers and or their workers have died in buildings because of this hydrogen sulfide. So I want to bring that to your attention. Other hazardous gas and exposure, one is anhydrous ammonia, which in some crop areas, and I don't think this is a main problem yet in high rice growing areas, at least in most parts of the world. Other forms of fertilizer that may be used. But if you have a situation where, for example, maize may be grown, anhydrous ammonia could be one of the main fertilizers. And it's carried in tanks under pressure and applied to the soil where it's incorporated with the water in the soil. And if people are exposed to that, it's very caustic. It can penetrate the skin and the eyes and the lungs. And we've had almost every year, at least in Iowa, we have somebody who has been exposed that is cause of severe skin or eye injury and even death. So I just wanted to mention that. That's something that may be on the future in agriculture in Southeast Asia. Okay, talk a little bit about prevention. And one of the things I want to mention first is whenever there's something that's a potential respiratory exposure, we always start to grasp for respirators, something to, keep it out of your lungs. Well, that typically we like to think first about engineering it out. You might use ventilation to reduce the exposure. You might do something to avoid any kind of contaminated spaces. Those are the things you want to talk about first in management. The reason being is this: respirators are always not that effective because people wearing them don't know how to wear them properly. And if you don't have a good seal around your face and it leaks, and it's not the proper respirator for the type of exposure that you have in that environment, that person may be artificially feel safe, but they're not. So that could be human error in terms of that problem. But let's talk about that. Most of these situations, in agricultural dust can be handled by something that I would call an N95. And you all know about N95 respirators because you all just went through and probably continuing to use an N95 as the key thing for protection against COVID. And they can be effective protection against organic dust as well, if in fact they fit tight and they don't leak, and they're kept that way. So that's a key thing to think about. Now, I talked also about some of these hydrogen sulfide and other severely toxic problems, whether it be a pesticide exposure or whether it be this hydrogen sulfide or whether it be anhydrous ammonia. This type of respirator, an N95 respirator, just doesn't cut it. In many of these situations, you really need to have a self-contained breathing apparatus, like a scuba type operation, like you see on the bottom side there. So again, that's just a very thumbnail sketch of what can be done for prevention. And I think the biggest thing for anybody getting involved in learning how to protect people is first understand the job. What do these people do that bring them in close association with these hazardous environments? And then use the principles of removing the hazard or engineering it out or ventilation or some way to avoid those confined spaces before you ever think about respirators. So that's it. Now let me, I just typically do this in my classes as I have a pre-test and a post-test, but I just have a post-test here, just a few questions for you to think about and see if you have captured the essence of some of the messages I've tried to get across in this particular session. So first of all, what is organic toxic dust syndrome or organic dust? Is it farmer's lung? Is it bronchitis? Is it asthma? Is it acute airways inflammation with generalized symptoms? Or you don't know? Well, I can't have you raise your hand necessarily, but I want you to think about it for a minute and think about which one of those, how you would answer that. And the way I would answer that is right here. That organic dust toxic syndrome is acute airways inflammation with generalized symptoms. Remember, 4 to 6 hours after they have been exposed, they develop symptoms of severe influenza. Okay, so know that. Second one is, what is the principal respiratory inflammatory substance in organic dust? Well, is it tannic acid? Is it pollen? Is it endotoxin, mold spores, or you don't know? Think about that a second and what we just talked about. And remember this, we talked that yes, tannic acid is often found in these agricultural dusts, as is pollen, as are mold spores. But here is the principal thing. Endotoxin, which is a component of the cell wall of gram-negative bacteria. Okay, and atopic asthma is the major cause of respiratory problems in farmers and their families. And I hope I emphasize this enough that that is false. It's primarily inflammation caused by those inflammatory substances, which is led by endotoxin. And atopic or allergic asthma is really a minor cause of problems. In our work in doing surveys, we find that out of a large population of farmers, less than 1% really are atopic potentials. Whereas the general population, non-farming, it's up to 5 to 7% or even higher that can be atopic individuals. And which one is not caused by agricultural dust? We didn't have a chance to look at many of these different things. That is, there's silophyllous disease, which is caused by nitrogen oxides and stored grain, chopped grain. Bronchitis, non-allergic asthma, mucous membrane. You don't know. Well, the point is, and I hopefully think that you've got this, that silophyllous disease is not caused by agricultural dust, but it can cause bronchitis, it can cause non-allergic asthma, it can cause mucous membrane irritation. And the primary toxic gas related to liquid manure, I think we talked about that. And I hope you got that it's hydrogen sulfide. So again, going back to what I hope are the most important messages that you take home out of this session. And first of all, that respiratory problems in our research, and I think this is fairly universal, is the number one health problem. You know, that is a more problem in most cases than are infectious diseases, toxic diseases, etc. In most modern type agricultural operations. And that organic dust is the number one exposure that causes most of the respiratory problems. And the fact that it's inflammation, not allergy, that is the primary pathology of organic dust. And organic dust toxic syndrome is the number one acute problem of organic dust exposure. Number one acute problem, okay? Quite common in our environments, quite common, up to 30% of farmers experience that. And chronic problems, that is over a long period of time, perhaps lesser exposure, you have bronchitis and non-allergic asthma are certainly there. And then the gases, hydrogen sulfide and nitrogen oxides can also cause respiratory illnesses. Those are the things that I wanted to talk about. And again, this is just a brush of the whole issue of respiratory diseases in agriculture. And typically, when I teach this course, it includes, oh golly, probably about 4 hours of lectures to get across all of the issues involved. And within that textbook that I mentioned earlier, Agricultural Medicine, it's the largest chapter in the whole book. So thanks for all you do, all of you out there on this particular conference. Is thanks to you for doing this. Thanks to you for your interest. Thanks to you for your participation. Thanks to all of you who will be participating and presenting in the rest of the course. So this is an old tractor of mine that I use on my farm. And one thing that I want to mention is that rollover protectives, tractor rollovers, should I say, are really the number one cause of death in most agricultural operations around the world. Not just the US, not just Canada, not just Sweden, not just Australia, but this little device here to keep the tractor, when it does tip over, will protect a person. So I wanted to leave you with that. This is acute injuries, which is very important. And then, of course, we spend most of the time on the respiratory hazards that are occurring. So again, thank you all, and I'm very pleased to be here. And I think that the first slide has my contact information, and any of you who have a question or a comment and would like to address that to me by email or whatever, I'm willing to try to answer and engage all of you or any of you in this whole field. This has been a passion of mine coming from a farm, and I have spent my total, almost in my entire career in the field, announced some 56 years or something like that. And I'm just hoping that all of that effort and all of your efforts will help to make agriculture a much more healthful and productive operation. There is a saying that there has never been a country that has succeeded without a quality, sustainable agriculture. And when we've got one of the most important animals on the farm, that is the humans who do the work, we need to take care of them. Again, thank you very much, and please feel free to contact me if you need to do so. Good luck, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Professor Dunham, for the outstanding speech and its material. Excuse me, Professor Dunham. We still have a few minutes. So are you willing to have a discussion with the participant? Excuse me, Professor Dunham. We still have a few minutes. It's like 20 minutes left. So are you willing to have a discussion with the participant?
Yeah, excuse me, Professor Dunham. We have some few minutes left on your session. Are you willing to have some discussion with participants in this session, Professor? Okay, excuse me, Professor Dunham, can you do unmute, please? So we have.
I'm sorry, could you?
Yeah, can you
Could
hear
you
us, Professor?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
All right. So we have some few minutes left on your session, Professor. Are you willing to have some discussion with all participants in the Zoom?
Oh, yes. You know, any questions I will take. Oh,
All
yes,
right.
certainly.
Okay. Thank you, Professor, for
Comments, questions or comments. And if any of you have had experience, you know, with any of these respiratory problems or any problem in resulting in exposures on the farm, let's hear your experience as well as what questions you might have.
All right. Thank you, Professor. For all audience and participant who have questioned, we are allowing you to raise your hand. All right. In this venue we already have one questioner to the college over here. Please.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. Good evening, Professor. My name is Rizky Robert Adiansyah. I want to ask something. We knew that almost farmers in Indonesia have the middle-lower economic characteristic. Based on this characteristic, what do you think the right and affordable precaution we can educate to farmers to prevent various respiration abnormalities among farmers? Thank you.
Yes, I wonder if somebody can repeat that question. It was difficult to hear through the face mask.
Okay. We knew that almost farmers in Indonesia have the middle-lower economic characteristic. Based on this characteristic, what do you think the right and affordable precaution we can educate to farmers to prevent various respiration abnormalities among farmers?
Oh, are you okay? So let me see if I understand your question. So there's in Indonesia, there's a lot of small farmers and a lot of workers, and what can be done to educate them to prevent? Is that the question, essentially?
Yes, Professor.
Yeah. Well, you know, the next person will come up later is Susan Brumby, who has done that extremely, extremely well in Australia, and she might be able to mention that. In addition to that, one of my good colleagues in Argentina works for one of the farmers unions, and his job is actually to go out into the field and work directly with the farm workers and show them, directly with sort of, shall we say, hands-on experience, how to keep themselves safe. So I think the key there is to understand and being able to communicate without having to be, too scientific, if you will, but to be able to talk in terms that will be in with their understanding and fit within their, shall we say, their sociological perception of their work and of you. So I think those are just things that I would suggest, but also it has to be a thing that has to be repeated and not just a single presentation, but it almost has to be a continuing presentation to be able to be effective over long term. And maybe if Sue Brumby would want to mention a few things from her experience, I think that would be good. Sue, do you want to say something in response to that question?
I think it's enough. Thank you, Professor.
All right. Thank you for the questions. Also, thank you for Professor Dunham for the amazing answers. We have any? All right. Okay. Please deliver your questions.
Excuse me, am I audible? Okay, I have questions about this topics. I just finished my student study services in a kind of a rural area with most of the community there work as a tobacco farmer with kind of low educational background. One thing that I wondered is which one should we approach first to them to make them aware about this farmers' diseases? Is this by educate them first about these diseases, just like like socialization, or kind of approach by and educate them in a community, or just by educate them first about the importance of PPE? I think that's my questions.
Yeah, so there wasn't a very good audio that came through. It was kind of garbled, so I didn't quite understand the nature of the question. But did it have to do, again, similar to the first one, was how do you communicate prevention to the farmers? Was that the essence of your question?
Yes, by educate them how to do that.
Yeah. Do you have, I know in, in the United States and Canada and in Australia and various places, there is a system called extension where there is typically an agriculturally trained persons that are stationed throughout the country and they can know the people, know the problems, and be able to communicate with them, being able to make it more directly relatable to that particular person and the particular jobs that they do. And again, if you can do that, and you have people that are regularly there, they will have a much greater potential effect of protection than than without that kind of a continual exposure to how you prevent disease. And that's basically about the only thing I can say about that, I think, is continual, make sure that it's socially acceptable, that it is confined to the type from somebody who knows and understands the people and understands the work that they do and understands the exposures that occur, and know the results of those exposures if they aren't taken to heed. So that's really the best I think that I can mention. That you can use all different kinds of communication systems as well. And I'm assuming that it's starting to be a situation that even out in the rural areas and farming communities that there is internet connection growing probably. So that is something that you can have for mass communication as an example. Flyers can be used that again for populations that are expressed in terms that are understandable to the people. Radio, television announcements, any kind of media exposure can be very helpful.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor, for your answer my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questioner and Professor Danham for the great answer. So we open again about to question. So let's move on to the online questioner. So we have one raised hand that in Zoom with names I Dewa Ayu. Are you with us? To I Dewa Ayu. Yeah. So take your time.
And please deliver your questions.
To I Dewa Ayu, are you with us?
Okay, I think we need to go to the next question.
Yeah.
Okay, for any participants who have a question for Professor Donham, please raise your hand and we will welcoming you to deliver the questions.
Hello?
Okay.
Yes.
I'm unmuted right now. Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm sorry, I have error webcam. So I just say, yeah. My questions is, if I'm not mistaken, Prof. Kelly mentions about the role of tannin. Tannin that might be as an allergen or toxin or irritants. Is that right, Prof. Kelly? Tannin. My
Yes.
question. Yeah. Okay.
No. Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah. Would you like to give us maybe a brief explanations about that? Because as you know, if I'm not mistaken, tannin is a kind of polyphenol that can act as an antioxidant.
Oh, antioxidants in what
Yes.
situation?
Tannin is kind of polyphenol that can act as antioxidants. So that's why when I read in your slide, that might be as an allergen, toxin, or irritants. We need brief explanations about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
So you're. Let me see if I understand your question. The question is the use of antioxidants useful in the terms of one of these organic dust toxic diseases that we talked about, respiratory diseases?
No, I mean you mentioned about tannin. Tannin, one of the chemical substance that might be found in some
In the-
plants. Yeah. Tannin.
Chemical
A-
sub.
Yeah.
Oh, in the livestock manure operations where hydrogen sulfide might be.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, that situation. Yeah. Well, you know that actually there has been some uses of trying to use antioxidants to help reduce the promotion of hydrogen sulfide. And there has been some success, but I would have to say that generally speaking, the cost of doing that seemed to be higher than, too high, I should say, that it never really got used in a very high level, if you will. Probably the biggest thing that has been used is to try to put oxygen into the system so that you can go against what would be an anaerobic situation in the manure to make it available so that oxygen is there. And then if that's there, then you don't get the hydrogen sulfide production. That's probably the best engineering situation that's been tried in those situations at this point, rather than actually chemical antioxidants.
Well, it's okay. Actually, my question is concerns particularly with the chemical substance called tannin. TANNIN. Because as I know that tannin is act as an antioxidant, this is kind of less polyphenol compound.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but in your presentations, you mentioned that this can be an allergens or toxin or irritants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what we want to know. Maybe you can give us brief explanations about that, because this is the first time. Yes, I heard that tannin is toxic like that.
Mm-hmm. Let me say this. I don't have a good answer for that right off the top, but if you would send me an email with that question, I will do some research and get back to you with what I can find.
Okay.
Would you do that?
Thank you very much, Prof. Kelly. Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's to the last question that we come from our deans, Dr. Supangat. Yeah.
Okay, to Dr. Supangat, please deliver the questions.
Gambarnya bisa ditampilkan, Mas. Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Kelly. I am Supangat, gambar yang ini, gambarnya Prof. Kelly maksudnya. Kalau ini sudah biasa. Okay, I am Supangat, Prof. Maybe you for several time. We have question because in your book about Agromedicine and other scientific, yes, you provide is based on the developed country, but it's very less in the developing country. But as you know that Indonesia is developing country, and our farmer is traditional farmer, not modern farmer. So the setting maybe is different. So our question is how we start. We from Indonesia, from Junior, want to be one of center of agromedicine in the world. specifically in the traditional farmer. So what we should do for the first time, have you experienced or maybe something, how to facing the problem with the traditional setting like that? Thank you very much.
Well, is that a question about how to expand and modernize your agriculture? Is that the question?
Yes, I mean, to start from the research, effects, sufficient science, but this is the setting is traditional, not the modern farming.
Yeah.
Because if we read your book and your publication, maybe it's all of talk about the America, Australia, maybe Europe. That is all is modern farming. It's not matching with our condition like that.
Right. Yeah, I understand that, and of course, the type of exposures that your average farm worker will have in Indonesia is entirely different than what we'd have in the Western world. It just is. But regardless, what I'd hoped that is to take some of those principles, and particularly in terms of how do you have situations where there's organic dust exposure, and I could see that in sort of rice storage or combining rice. Those kinds of situations could present exposures that might cause some of the conditions that I saw. It's going to agriculture around the world in most countries is dynamic, and it will continue to expand and improve. And if you just look at China, for example, 10, 15 years ago, they were a developing country in their agriculture. And now they're highly productive, and their methods and so on are much different and much more similar to Western world. That's probably a creeping situation that's going to, I'm assuming that's probably going to occur throughout Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia. So it's going to be timing coming, and it might be entirely different 20 years from now than it is today. And I think the best thing to do is to learn from what else is going on, just like this conference around the world, so that when those times come, you can hopefully avoid some of the problems that we've experienced in the Western world, so to speak. And I've been in Indonesia. My son was a teacher in Indonesia for some time, and I very much enjoyed coming there and learning about the people, learning a little bit about the agriculture that goes on, and I understand exactly your question and concern and where it's coming from. So my pleasure is all to have been, witnessing your country and the developing agriculture there. Some of it has been ongoing, doing the same way and improving on what they've done for the last, 50, 100 years or more. But it will change. It will change, and I would bet you that you will be having trouble trying to find people who want to continue to farm, where their children will want to go to the university and find some other kind of a job. So the people remaining out there are very important. We got to figure out ways to keep those people alive and well, to feed the rest of us. So thank you for that question. I'm sorry, I don't think I can give you a perfect answer, but I certainly understand, where you're coming from.
Okay, thank you very much. I will contact you later by email maybe, or follow up this question.
Yes, surely. Yes, very much so. Please do.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Spangat, for the question. Also, Professor Dunham for the amazing answer. A question from Dr. Spangat as a closing for this discussion session. Thank you once again for Professor Dunham for the amazing, outstanding speech and amazing discussion. Next, it's a documentation of awarding e-certificate for Professor Dunham. The committee, please show the e-certificate for Professor Dunham.
Okay, maybe we will do some documentation. In my comment, 3, 2, 1. Once more, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And it will be privilege if you can join us throughout the conference, but we could perfectly understand if you have any other agenda, Professor. Once more, thank you very much for joining us today.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the next agenda is the plenary lecture that will divide it into 2 sessions with Professor Susan Alison Brumby as the first speaker,
Professor Peter Lundqvist as the second speaker.
This plenary lecture will be guided by Dr. Laksmi Indreswari, surgeon specialist, as the moderator. To the committee, please show us the the curriculum vitae for Dr. Laksmi. Dr. Laksmi is a lecturer in anatomy at Faculty of Medicine, University of Jember, also a surgeon at Dr. Subandi General Hospital, Jember, Indonesia. Without any further ado, to Dr. Laksmi, please welcome the plenary session.
Okay, thank you, dear Master of Ceremony. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, dear all participants here in this room and the one inside the Zoom screen. Thank you, the committee, for the chance. It's really great to be here. So for the next 2 hours, I will be assisting the plenary session for the first day of this event, the 4th Icatd. For today's plenary sessions, we're going to have 2 outstanding speakers that came all the way from Australia and Sweden. So without further ado, I would like to ask the committee to help me to screen share the curriculum vitae of Professor Susan Brumby. Okay. Professor Susan Brumby, with her long, undoubtable educational history, and then may I see the curriculum vitae? Right now, Professor Susan is appointed as Clinical Associate Professor, School of Medicine in Deakin University, and she's also was the founding director for National Center for Formal Health from 2008 until 2022. Good morning, Professor Susan. How are you? Okay, maybe you can unmute your Zoom. Can you hear my voice? Okay.
It's okay. My mouse battery just decided to play up, I think. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe today you're going to talk about the emerging viral diseases and how they impact the life of farmers, especially in Australia, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Okay. So without any further ado, dear participants, please welcome Professor Susan Brumby. You're welcome, sir. Do you want to share your PowerPoint from your computer?
I hope so. Is that working now?
Okay, it's working now. Please.
Excellent. That's good. You can hear me clearly?
Yes, clearly, Professor.
Well, it's lovely to be here, and I would like to acknowledge your chair, Dr. Harridan, your rector. I would like to also acknowledge Professor Donham and Professor Lundqvist, distinguished guests and delegates, and your dean, and say firstly how very sorry I am not to be there with you in Jember. I really love Jember and coming and doing work with you, and I'm so proud of how fantastic work you've been doing at the university in embedding agromedicine through your curriculums and in your everyday life about how you think and work around your medicine and your faculty of health. So I am very sorry not to be there with you, and look forward to hopefully catching up at another time soon. Let's see if this will work for me. So a little bit about Australian agriculture. Obviously, we're very close to Australia in Indonesia, and we're quite a little bit different given you have so many islands and we have so few, but we are an island, and largest island and smallest continent. Our population is vastly different from Indonesia, sitting at about 25.5 million now. We're a highly literate population, and our main agriculture is dairy, wool, beef, lamb, sugar, cotton, timber pulp, which a lot of timber pulp is now leaving our area, and seafood. We are also known for our mining resources, particularly iron ore, gold, aluminium, and coal, of which there's lots of discussions also occurring around coal. I would like to just reflect back on December 19 to February 2020, which is when Australia, particularly Victoria and New South Wales, experienced very, very severe bushfires, and it devastated a large part of our communities. I'm based in Victoria, which is in that bottom right-hand side of Australia, and the bottom map on the slide shows you where a lot of the bushfires occurred. It was particularly a horrific experience. And of course, we were only just, in fact, we weren't even through all the bushfires when Victoria, Melbourne had their first COVID case on the 25th of January 2020. And our borders were subsequently closed March 2020 and have pretty much remained closed until recently, which has really had quite a huge impact on us. The National Centre for Farmer Health, and it's wonderful that we've had a fabulous delegation from the University of Jemba, and also had students continuing their graduate certificate in agricultural health and medicine that have actually come and visited us here, and also visited Deakin. But it is a partnership between a regional health service of the Western District Health Service, which is based about 300 kilometres west of Melbourne, in very much a pastoral and cropping area. We were first established in 2008, and this was 2 years after I actually met Professor Kelly Donham formally and did their agricultural or agromedicine course in the University of Iowa in 2006. And I was then very fortunate to go and do a sabbatical time with Kelly and his wife Jean in Iowa as well, and work at the University of Iowa with them, and that was fabulous. And I'm very grateful for that time. Our centre then came and established on very much the improvement of health, wellbeing and safety for farmers, farm employees, farm families, and wanted to work sort of nationally. Australia is a big country with quite a lot of similarities in some ways to the US, but without the population. And also wanted to make a difference to farmers' lives wherever we could. Our key strategic goals have been to grow, particularly working with stakeholders to increase our reach and reputation, and help others, I guess, develop their own expertise in agricultural health and medicine, to really engage with other people and see the importance of rural and agricultural communities wherever you live, and hopefully build and get people to trust us and also to use our website, which has recently been updated and has quite a lot of translatable language on there to make it more available and usable. Our key pillars have been education and training, a standalone course, or it is also a graduate certificate with 4 units. And it's wonderful that we've had students from the University of Jemba, and again, I really acknowledge the incredible work that has been undertaken by the University of Jemba in embedding agromedicine right throughout your medical curriculum. I think it's an astounding achievement, and I'm just so pleased to have been associated and worked with you all across this time. We also are very big on research and innovation, and it was wonderful to hear your Vice Governor speak of the work that's being undertaken with the cholinesterase testing. We've done quite a bit of that ourselves and found real value in seeing how, when farming people can understand their exposures better, it helps them to minimize any exposures or eliminate them. We've been doing a lot of work in co-design at the moment and working online, particularly through COVID. And I am going to share with you a couple of projects that we've been doing to just show how we're working on that. Our business development is also working with secondary schools and a lot of other stakeholders. Our website is obviously our reputation and reach, and our governance is working with farmers all the time. In every project that we do, we have a farmer steering committee, and we certainly have a board of management that includes many farmers. So they're kind of our 5 things. I have spoken about these previously, so I didn't want to spend too much time going through these, but really wanted to share with you a couple of projects that we've been doing that around emerging viral diseases and some of the challenges that we've been facing during COVID in our agricultural populations. I do like to refer back to this slide around the flow-on effect of poor farmer health, and you know that people often say to us, well, why are farming populations different? And why are they different to any of us? And I think the key thing is that farms are still predominantly family owned and operated. So you have a farm, you have a family, and that when farmers become unwell or sick, there's not only the loss of income and pain and suffering, but there is often the health cost. And for us in Australia, whilst we are seen to have a universal baseline for accessible healthcare, in rural areas, bulk billing, as we call it, is not that common, and people are frequently out of pocket to access health services. It's also distance, and it's also a lack of public transport. When someone becomes unwell on a farm, it also means that the family often have to pick up the task, whether that's as a carer's role or actually doing increased farm work, and that often incorporate partners and children. And in Australia, we know that over a third of deaths on farms are actually children under the age of 15 who are working on farm or participating in farming activities. We also know that over 50% of siblings on farm supervise younger siblings. So the whole kind of flow-on effect of what happens on farms is very much a family. The farm impact when someone gets unwell also or injured is the loss of key labour, the risk to animals or the loss of crop, and again, occupational health and safety risks with people doing tasks that they're not actually suitable to be doing. And we also know in farming communities that most farmers are heavily involved in everything. They may be on the school council, they may be involved in Australian Women in Agriculture, they may be involved in the local show committees and the fire brigades, and that farm injuries or an illness is a loss to the community, a loss to industry, and a reduced capacity all round. So we've been very mindful about this with everything that we do. So whilst we're based in Victoria, Australia, right down here in the bottom right-hand corner, we do have a lot of MOUs. Well, not a lot. We have some very special MOUs, of which obviously the University of Jemba is one, and we've just recently renewed that, which is fantastic. We have one with Alberta, the University UKE in Germany, New Zealand, Ghana, Centurion University in India, Chagas in Ireland, the University of Iowa, USA, where Professor Donham is from, and also in ODIA in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And part of our work, particularly before COVID, was working with other areas to share what we know about farmer health, well-being and lifestyle and safety, and thinking, well, what we found is there are a lot of common similarities. Whilst our countries may be quite different, that when it comes to farming people, a lot of the challenges were similar wherever we went. And ironically, the last piece of work we did was in Bangladesh and India, and I arrived back pretty much mid-February, just as Victoria had hit its first COVID case. And we'd been doing quite a lot of sharing of data around farmer health and lifestyle assessments. And I'm really keen to get that going and share what we're finding in the different countries and village farmers to actually help identify what is the best way to improve health, well-being and safety for populations wherever they may be. So please, if you do have an interest in this, particularly now that COVID hopefully is settling, that we can move on and continue this excellent work for all of us. So today, thinking about the title of the conference, and which was thinking about, for me, making a difference to farmers' lives through emerging viral diseases and the challenges in agromedicine, I wanted to really share with you today 2 projects that we've been doing during COVID, and remembering the backdrop of the horrific bushfires that we experienced only weeks before COVID hit Australia. So the 2 projects particularly I wanted to share was one, a rural study, which was to understand the intention to be vaccinated, and also looking at anxiety, coping and stress through 2 COVID screening clinics that were in rural areas. So this study was undertaken prior to vaccination being available, but it was, I guess, the impetus for us to think really seriously about how to get vaccination numbers up in our rural and farming communities, and so that immunity would be easier to obtain and the lockdowns would be stopped. And the other project is called Snapshot Rural Vic, which came later in 2020, and it was strategically designed and deliberately designed to try to improve the mental health of rural Victorians by reducing stigma and encouraging connection around positive mental health and well-being, again in farming communities. So if I can take you back to July 2020, which was pre-vaccine, COVID vaccines, we were getting told, were being developed faster than ever before, but were not yet available. For us in Australia and globally, vaccine hesitancy was seen as a possible barrier for us to be able to achieve herd immunity. and that the best solution to the mass casualties that we were seeing, particularly in Europe at the time and the US at the time, was to try to ensure that when the vaccines became available, there would be a fast and rapid uptake, obviously as soon as the vaccines were available. We also knew that vaccine hesitancy, was likely to be higher in rural areas, that people who were depressed or anxious were least likely to want to be vaccinated, that women were less likely to want to be vaccinated, people with lower health literacy or of lower income. So for us and farmers in Victoria at the time, we were starting to be hit with mobility restrictions, lockdowns, reduced market access, shortages of food to some extent were underway. And this was partly also because of the bushfires, huge shortages of labour because Australia does rely on people coming on working visas, as well as particularly for agricultural labour. Modelling had also been done by the Doherty Institute, which advised that we needed the population to have at least 70% of fully vaccinations before any restrictions could ease. And at that time, we were still madly managing tracing and hospital caseloads. And we're still having quite a few cases at the moment now, but I'm not sure if you're all aware of it, but Melbourne, which is in Victoria in our state, was the most locked down city in the world. So we certainly had quite a few challenges. We already knew that vaccine hesitancy was an issue, that rural populations were more likely to be vaccine hesitant, and that agricultural communities and workers were identified as high risk. And that was also due to the lack of hospital expertise and staff, and also the lack of ventilators if needed in rural communities. And certainly where I live, we had 2 ventilators. But even then, if we'd needed ventilation, the number of staff that were suitable if someone became unwell and got COVID themselves would mean that we would be very stretched or most likely unable to staff it anyhow. So our study aims were to assess the intention and motivation of people to have COVID-19 at our 2 regional Victorian settings, and whether or not motivation would change if it was recommended by health professionals. And we tried lots of different ways to motivate people to come in and be screened for COVID, but also to start the conversation and prepare people for vaccination when it was available, once we got the results of this. So data collection was used using a survey tool called Qualtrics. We were particularly interested in knowing about people that had comorbidities, obviously, people that were living out on farms, whether or not they had psychological distress or fear of COVID or were coping poorly. We also looked at their age, gender, education, and employment as possible confounders. We used a 7-point Icatd score to collect responses as well on intention to have the COVID-19 vaccine. How likely is it if it becomes available? And if a health provider strongly recommends it, would that be likely to change your decision to get vaccinated? I wasn't going to spend a lot of time going through the actual data, rather to talk to you about what we did as a health service, the role of the Centre for Farmer Health in getting more people through. This was actually research undertaken by the National Centre for Farmer Health primarily. But basically, because I thought you'd be interested, we did get more females than males through, 30% of males, approximately 68 females. Most people were born in Australia, and most people actually had fairly high levels of education, which was a bit of a surprise. The majority were alcohol drinkers, previous smokers. That was actually higher than we expected. We did find that some people had taken up smoking again. And we also did look at anxiety and depression and coping and fear of COVID. The key thing was that the motivation to have the vaccine was higher with people that had higher education. What was of interest was that people whose financial situation had been impacted negatively, as you'd be aware, people had to work from home or shops. A lot of retail was completely shut for a long time. People lost jobs, although Australia did have quite a generous safety net come in to help people, but that people were not likely to change their decision about vaccination, even if they'd been impacted negatively. And certainly in Australia, as it played out, it became mandatory to be vaccinated, but at this stage, we didn't know that. The motivation to have the vaccine, if recommended by healthcare providers, was also higher with those that had a bachelor degree and those who drank alcohol, but there was quite a change, about a 10% change, if health professionals recommended the vaccination. So as a health service and as people serving rural communities, that gave us a bit of more insight about the key role that health professionals or agricultural professionals, agri-health professionals across the whole community, not just doctors, not just nurses, but everybody, physios, the whole gamut of people working in health could actually have a key role, including vets, on encouraging people to be vaccinated. I guess the other thing we were interested in, was there a difference between the two sites? So one site was based in Hamilton and the other site was based down at the coast, which was a strong dairy farming area. But there was a difference in sites. So you can see here, which was Western District Health Services, the blue one. Yes, they were motivated, but were they more motivated if it was recommended by a health professional? Absolutely. So we can see about a 6% increase. And then similarly with Southwest Healthcare, about a 6% increase. So we started ourselves from a little bit of a lower base, which I guess helped get us more ready for the role that the health service and the Centre for Farmer Health could play in preparing everybody for vaccination once it became available. So the motivation across the two sites was 73 and 80%, which then increased to 78 and 86% if the recommendation came from healthcare providers. As outlined earlier, we knew from the Doherty Institute that for any lockdowns to occur, we needed to have 70% double vaccinated as a minimum. And you know, it was quite alarming because at 70% we were still going to be having restrictions on our movement. But to actually get more freedom, we needed to have at least 80% vaccinated or up to 90%. So these were quite, I guess, sobering things for us to be reflecting on. Again, financial situation did not seem to affect people's decision, and there was absolutely no difference in intention to vaccinate with those who had reported comorbidities or were experiencing stress or fear of COVID. And I think for us too, that was quite alarming because we expected that people who had comorbidities would be more likely to want to be vaccinated. but at this stage, that was not the case. Whilst we had done quite an extensive literature review, other studies had shown that psychological stress did affect willingness to be vaccinated. Our study did not show this. Higher education was certainly a factor in people's willingness to be vaccinated. And it certainly made us think about more ways of targeting people with lower levels of education and how to engage better with that. And the increasing role of health professionals in advocating for vaccination in lots of spaces. So as a health service, it really made us focus then on how we were going to get particularly farmers, because there was quite a period of time in Victoria when a lot of the rural communities or people living out of town just were not coming in for screening. So we did quite a lot of work, and as you can see there, we were working with the local fire brigades, who are invariably farmers, to actually come in for screening and get them and feel more encouraged to come in. We also did a couple of DVDs about coronavirus and You on the Farm with local farmers to also try and get the conversation going about what to do if you're having any symptoms, and then also what to do if you do get coronavirus, and then also how to get ready for when the vaccinations come. I'm just going to grab a drink of water. Please excuse me. So what we did next was really looking at the significant role that health professionals were going to play in influencing vaccination. And we did everything we possibly could. When people came in for testing, we'd be talking about when vaccination becomes available. We had weekly public forums, in fact, often daily public forums where the local government would also be involved in other health professionals. We upskilled everybody in contact tracing. We had a massive general media and social media communication. And when the vaccinations became available, the hospital really stepped up and opened it generally to everybody. And we helped at the centre booking people in, doing everything we possibly could. There were a few barriers because people may not have been connected to the internet. Some of the systems, if people weren't IT literate, weren't that friendly or didn't have mobile phones. We also started a COVID-19 hotline to assist people that had COVID-19 symptoms, were looking for vaccinations, were looking for rapid antigen tests, registrations. We booked people in, and that hotline is still actually going today. We haven't had any calls this week, which is great, but we fielded over 1,000 calls. And with coronavirus, once it's been spreading through our community, we were actually using that to help people on farms connect in with hospital in the home, or pick up oximeters, or if they're at high risk, pick up antivirals. I guess for me, now looking back, once the vaccines became available, was the Southern Grampians Shire and Warrnambool well and truly reached above the original intention, and were amongst, for quite a period of time, were amongst the highest vaccination local areas in the state. And I just, this is from the 1st of August, but if you can see here, we're currently sitting on 80% with our third vaccine, and well and truly above 95% for our first and second. And similarly with the Warrnambool Southwest Coast. Queenscliff, interestingly, is a semi-agricultural area, but has a lot of retirees down there, so probably quite a lot of people with comorbidities as well. And Mount Alexander is also a rural community, and Boroondara is a metropolitan communities. So I think the way we responded to the data that we got back about how we can help our community with this pandemic and actually ensure that farming and agricultural communities were not disadvantaged, and that once we understood too the role that health professionals could play, we really stepped up. So that's that project that I wanted to share with you today. The other project is quite a different project, and it came about later in 2020 when, you know, Victoria had been experiencing a lot of lockdowns, and I'm not sure if you're all aware of it, but we had a thing called the Ring of Steel around Melbourne where literally people were barred from leaving the city. It was a really difficult time. And Snapshot Rural Vic was sort of initiated later in 2020, and it was really based on trying to improve the mental health of rural Victorians through reducing stigma and encouraging connection around positive mental health and well-being. And it was really to use our farming communities to connect, but also hopefully for people to find some similarity and reassurance in day-to-day life, which had been incredibly difficult. It was a social media primarily, which used Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. It was funded by the Department of Health, and it's still got its own Snapshot Rural Vic Facebook group, and ironically it is still going even though the project finished, and people are still posting pictures and things on there. So I'll just share with you a little bit about this. So as I said earlier on, if you can think about how we were back then, Victoria's rural community had been suffering very much with drought, extraordinary bushfires, and then the COVID-19 pandemic with mandatory isolation, curfews, limits on where we could travel. In July 2020, Victoria declared a state of disaster with weeks and weeks of strict lockdowns, including the Ring of Steel in Melbourne. And I'm not sure if you can kind of see that. That's our premier, and that's where the Ring of Steel was. And whilst that was Melbourne, in rural areas, we still also had curfews and 5-kilometre radius if we were well, and obviously very strict isolation. You can see the cow with the mask on. That was one of the photos from this project, and also a few others. But the regional lockdowns were pretty tough, and I guess too they, because of the population, once a community became unwell with an outbreak, then obviously you didn't have enough staff to run the hospitals. So the project itself touched a lot of people, as you can see, across Victoria, by being able to integrate with the project. And I've just popped a couple of snapshots that came from people just trying to do their everyday life and keeping on with what their business was, or children at home being schooled, etc. So what we set up was weekly themes, and I've just listed some of those for you, but like custodianship of the land, the next generation coming along on the farm, and remembering that most people were everybody was homeschooling at this time. View from my window, so that was encouraging people to just take a snap of what they were seeing out their window. We asked people to share what crafting they were doing, or like quite a few people did COVID cooking, as we called it, but COVID crafting. Then obviously spring, we had a Rural Women's Week. We had stories from the shed, masks on farm. which surprisingly wasn't very popular at all. We didn't get many photos for that one. And COVID cooking, and then people telling you a story. I just, I think this photo here, so this is a goat and the little boy home from school, and Nick actually wrote that she was really dreading her son having to stay home from school and be homeschooled again. Like, she just felt overwhelmed. There was too much to do. There was so much on the farm and chores. And she sent this photo in, and I actually thought I had included the narrative around this, so I'm doing this from memory now. But her key thing was she got so much joy out of seeing her son playing with the goat every day and having fun and frolicking, that it really uplifted her spirit a lot, and she actually got a lot out of it. The photo next is one of the COVID crafting one, and this was quite an extensive piece of work that a person sent in using bits from nature, or like seed pods and flower pods and branches and leaves, to actually then do a tapestry and include them in sort of needlecraft work. It was an extraordinary piece of work. And then she's popped some drawing in as well. And that won the People's Choice, because every week all the photos would get shared on Facebook, and then we would select about 10 that we thought were the best kind of photos, and then people voted for People's Choice. And if you won People's Choice, you were actually given a voucher for $100 to spend in your community. So we were really big about this. You weren't allowed to go to a big department store, or you weren't allowed to go to, say, like the big supermarkets, or you had to spend it in your community. You could spend it at the supermarket, but it had to be the one in your community. And so we were trying to also give back to the communities. And I think that was a really good thing to do. It was messy trying to manage invoices and things like that, because everybody prefers to just give credit cards, but we were really adamant that we wanted to put the money back into the communities where people lived. We did quite an extensive evaluation, and I thought I'd just share some of these comments with you, remembering that the whole idea of this program was to engage rural communities and to improve mental health and reduce a bit of stigma and encourage people to reach out and, you know, be part of their community and share their everyday lives. So some of them was, I like the themes and positive thoughts created. At the end of the day, it was a very timely thing mentally, as I was personally completely getting over lockdown, and it gave me something new to follow, engage in, and read and see other people's posts. My mental health has been lifted on several occasions simply from the pictures from our rural communities. That was from a male. Especially during the COVID crisis, seeing that life on the farm has to go on. There are still jobs to be done, animals that need to be fed, and families making a living. Seeing that portrayed in the Instagram photos made me feel more connected, especially seeing all that continued despite the pandemic going on. What was really interesting for us, if you'll notice, that one actually came from a female living in Melbourne. And we weren't focused on Melbourne, but in fact, Melbourne got incredible sustenance and upliftedness from this work, and actually joined in quite a lot. I think this one, this is Warren Davies and his farming family. He went, after months of physical separation due to COVID lockdowns, it was a celebration of family. Like branches on a tree, we all grow in different directions, yet our roots remain like one. The basic connection between us as family will always be love. We may not have it all together, but together we have it all, which was a really nice reflection once families got back together again, and he still posts on the snapshot. So just thinking about it, it wasn't a particularly complicated project. It wasn't, you know, scientifically rigorous. It was, I guess, heartfelt, community-based, community-driven, and actually seemed quite successful. It had a strong representation across a wide variety of ages. As I said, 41% of the audience actually came from Melbourne, which was a surprise. It finished in November 2020, but people still continue to post on #SnapshotRuralVic if you want to ever jump on. And it also taught us about managing sites off-site, because we never actually met the person that we appointed to be project officer to help us run this. She never actually came and worked at the centre because she couldn't, because of all the lockdowns. She has since come and visited us, even though the project's finished. But it taught us a lot too about the value of social media and connection. That's pretty much what I wanted to share with you, just thinking about the two specific projects that were around, I guess, challenges, whether it was bushfire, drought, or COVID-19, how we adapted and focused on our rural and farming community to try and get the best possible outcomes we could, whether that was through COVID, whether that was through developing better initiatives to engage with our farming communities to make sure when the vaccines and things became available that they were very strongly engaged. And then also the mental health and taking sustenance from the everydayness of farm life and sharing it, but building capacity to cope with COVID, I think was really important. I did want to share too that we have updated our website, I think probably since I spoke to you last, and that there certainly is translation available for our information and farmer fact sheets. So please jump on and use whatever is useful to you. We've still got our managing stress on the farm and managing health on the farm, which may be of use if you are doing health and lifestyle assessments out in community, but again, would be great to work with you on a set way of how to collect that data so we can share everything together. Very happy to take questions. And again, really, really sad that I'm not there with you, and feel free to reach out or whatever that works. So thank you very much, and thank you to the committee for inviting me to speak with you today.
Thank you, Professor Susan. It's really great for you to share your information with all of us today. So we still have around 15 minutes for discussions. Is there anybody who would like to ask questions? Questions for now? Sorry for this bit. Wait for. Thank you. Sorry for the disturbance. I can see that Professor Donovan's still here. And I would like to ask a little bit about the horrifying Black Summer bushfire, Professor Susan. Is it that devastating? is there a lot of farmers around there too? And since Professor Donham is still here, maybe since Indonesia also have a lot of forestry, and I really hope it's never going to happen in our country, but since Professor Donham is also here, still here, maybe he can add some more information. What can we do if that thing really happens? What should we prevent in the future for the community around the forestry? But before that, I would like to ask you about how that really impacts the farmers around the Victoria, especially. Professor Susan.
It was terrible. It was also, there was a lot of forest in this one, so there was some farmers, but not as much as perhaps other years. It was a lot of our national parks and coastal areas too. And it was obviously just over the Christmas New Year period. I don't know if you saw any of the footage from that time, but whole towns were just wiped out, like small rural towns, and people just huddled on beaches, I guess. And then the actual the Navy had to come in, which is unprecedented for us at that time, to actually rescue people and ship them back around, because there was just nowhere on the coast that wasn't sort of on fire at that time. It was absolutely horrific, and we are currently down south experiencing La Nina, so we've had quite significant floods for our area, which is nothing like the rainfall that obviously Indonesia gets, but it's we're in La Nina at the moment, so everything's pretty wet and lush, and everybody's just sighing a sigh of relief. But after every La Nina will come an El Nino, which obviously the US is experiencing at the moment with extreme water shortage, and I too would be really interested to hear from Professor Donham on how that is going. It's not going to go away, and I think that the really big thing for us, apart from fire, is the wind. The winds have just been so horrific, and there is no way you can stop a fire when you have gale force winds and you have forests or dry grass, and there's just no way. So the whole bushfire scenario develops its own climate, its own microclimate, and then it sucks out oxygen. It does all sorts of things in terms of how they continue to burn. It's the whole science around bushfire now is so different, but the winds is really the kind of thing that's changed.
Okay.
But I'd be interested too in Professor Donham, and obviously climate change is huge in this area, and adverse events.
Thankfully, you create those thing with the social media that makes them feel connected, and I believe that helps a lot of people and farmers especially. So Professor Donham, do you catch my questions earlier?
Yes,
Okay.
I did. United States is a big country, and it goes through several different climatic areas, and most of our fire hazard is in the western 1/4 of the country, and because we have two large river drainages in the system. One's the Mississippi River that goes from north to south. Followed a little bit westerly of that is the Missouri River. Once you get on that western side of that Missouri River, which was Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, and on into Colorado, the weather and climate changes dramatically. For example, in Iowa, where I showed you a map, we're kind of right in the middle of the state, we get up to 80, 90 centimeters of rain every year, and it's just a very lush and green place, and we really have not been burdened by fires of that nature that have been so critical as it has been in Australia and in the western, very far western parts of this country. Also, in the western part of this country, most of those fires have occurred in areas where there are heavy forests, long-standing forests. And within those forests, there's relatively little, farming that's being done. Yes, there's logging and so on and so forth, but not the typical sort of production agriculture. So entirely different than the Australian experience, where you have, this a little bit a brush kind of foliage and dry, dry conditions. And Australia, for most part of the continent, is one of the drier continents that we have. Except for the periphery around a 100-mile radius from the oceans and so on. And but it does impact. That's also where most of the agriculture goes too. So we've been fortunate in that we've had devastating forest fires that have been economically significant and have burned up many people's homes, but it really hasn't, infringed that much on agriculture as it has in Australia.
Okay.
And I really, pity what has happened there, and not, not once, but several times, and goes through that period of cycling. And one thing I'd have to say is that we've really have experienced, particularly again in that western part of the country, climatic changes, from what we expect, that are probably human-induced, industrial reduced, and that we're going to have to live with. We have not, in the Midwest and eastern part of the country, have not experienced that to any great degree at this point, but we probably will in the future coming up. The one thing I would also wanted to add that you kind of follow on a little bit with what Professor Brumby talked about, and that is with the COVID-19. And so I was headed up a nonprofit company called Rural Health and Safety of within our state. And so we decided, and I mentioned, one thing I will mention is that, and I don't know how this has occurred in other countries, but I know that in the United States and in Canada, that there was a huge political divide between the receptivity of getting vaccinated. So if you were on the very conservative side of politics, that you didn't trust the government, you thought that vaccinations were not necessary, and the government was trying to force you to have them, and so that really helped to hold back a lot of the vaccination, because it was more conservatism is found in our rural areas than it is in the urban areas in some aspects. But we put together a mobile clinic, a 36-foot mobile clinic, and we toured the whole state in doing COVID testing and COVID vaccination and any treatment, immediate treatment, and then referral that might be necessary to get people to the hospitals where they needed if they had to be on ventilators or more in-depth treatment than we could provide out of our mobile clinics. And so we, took it to the people, so to speak. And one of the things, again, trying to fight against the political division, was that we use the farmers' organizations. We have a farm bureau, we have a farmers union, we have a number of different farmers' organizations, and to get them to actually promote the use of these services. And I think we had some success in doing that way, because if we went out just holding the public health banner, saying that you need to have these vaccinations, we probably wouldn't have gotten very far. Because they're just, within that sort of political divide, there has been a loss of trust within our public health and even the medical community. So that was unfortunate, and it took a long time for us to get the 70% of the people vaccinated, as we typically need to do, and as Sue Brumby talked about, because there, from the standpoint of transmission within a community, if you typically, at least in most situations, in most infectious diseases, if you get 70% of the people immune, you're going to squelch that disease, because those organisms, viruses in this case, need to have non-immune people to survive and to pass it on.
Okay, thank you, Professor Donham. I'm really sorry I have to cut you off because of the time.
No problem.
Of the limited time that we have. I should go back to Professor Brumby. You were talking earlier about how you do your work, and one of them is about grow. You talk about how you engage stakeholder and increase it to get more engagement and reach more people. I find it kind of difficult to do it here. Do you have any tips or tricks to do it easily, like which party to be getting close to with or something like that, Professor?
Thank you. I know that it is difficult, and when I visited Jemba, I was struck by the extraordinary advantage that I felt that you have there, because you have an agricultural faculty and a School of Medicine faculty on the one campus. And I know they're different disciplines, but the opportunity for some synergy and connection there would be you may well have tried this since I was there. As Kelly mentioned, the farmer groups, or how to get them engaged with some of the work you're doing. I certainly know that farmers, wherever we have worked, have always been, they know they use chemicals, and they know they often need chemicals to get the production, but that they are also acutely aware of the problems that chemicals can cause them personally or their family. We've often found that a useful way to engage with the farmers directly. But certainly farmer groups, and again, the agricultural faculty could also be a way of connecting with your farmers or farming communities, or students going out that are doing work there, maybe sending med students or and ag students out together, just as a suggestion.
Okay, that makes sense. So first line is agricultural faculty, and then goes a bit higher than that. Okay, thank you, Susan. Is there any other questions from the audience, from the one on the Zoom?
It's very nice to see you too.
Yeah. Aside from the political side, I really love when you said that the time we understood the work of healthcare provider, that's where we can step out of those problems. Thank you for giving me those beautiful words. And then Professor Donham, I know that it's really late at night there, so if there's anything you would like to do, you can leave the Zoom. But if you want to join us, we would love to keep you with us for the rest of the day. And I guess that's it. Thank you, Susan. I still have a lot of other questions, but I have no more time for you, so sorry for that. So maybe, before I close this one, I read a bit about your PowerPoint about the MOU, and I see that there's also Iowa there, where Professor Donham is there. So maybe one day we can have a triangular sharing MOU, so we can share UNED and then Deakin and Iowa University. Amen. Thank you, Susan. So before I finish this first sessions, I would like the committee to share the e-certificate for Professor Brumby to show how much we love you, Professor, today. Please,
thank
committee.
you.
There you go, Susan. Thank you so much for sharing with us. if you have anything else to do, it's okay for you to leave the Zoom, but if you want to join us, feel free to do it. We'd love to have you join us.
Thank you.
You're welcome,
Thank you
Susan.
very much.
Okay, that's the first sessions of the plenary lecture today, and the second one is going to be continuing to our second superb speaker. It's Professor Peter Lundqvist from SLU, Swedish University. Can please the committee help me to share the curriculum vitae of our second outstanding speaker? Okay, Professor Peter is the Professor of Work of Science in SLU, Sweden, and then he's also Board of Directors of International Society for Agricultural Safety in 2014 until 2020. He's also the Vice President of the International Association of Rural Health and Medicine. Today, I think Professor Peter is going to talk about how the economics in agriculture from Sweden and international perspective. Professor Peter, are you with us today? No? Can you hear me, Professor Peter? Is Professor Peter with us already? Oh, he's not ready yet. Susan, I'm sorry. It's been a while since I called you. I really love about your COVID crafting, the way you plan that and then giving back to the community. Who came up with those ideas? It's very beautiful and advantageous at the same time. And we put it back to our community. So how can you come up with those things? Maybe you can unmute your phones first.
Thank you. It would be so nice to be there with you. I get so sick of the silly unmute, mute,
okay.
Turn camera off, turn camera on. I think the key thing for us was the government actually approached us to say that they were wanting to try and do something to lift mental health, but had no idea really of how to connect with the rural community. So a little bit like your previous question of how you actually connect with the stakeholders. So government wanted to connect with rural stakeholders, but actually didn't know how to do it. And so they asked us to think about what could be useful. And obviously, when we were planning it, we actually hoped that we may have been able to have some small face-to-face gatherings in our rural communities. But because of COVID, it was totally out of the question. We never got there. So it was always then online and trying to think of ways of engaging with people that allowed them to engage across a variety of devices. We also did quite a lot of paper media as well. So people were only looking at newspapers but still wanted to, or the radio, but still wanted to at least look at the photos or hear people's stories. They could do that without having to submit anything. It's tricky. I was thinking about your question about stakeholders. One of the other things, like if ever we're doing any research or any project, we always have some farmers on there, whether they may be in positions for farmer groups or whatever works for your community. But starting small and really building that level of trust, if they trust you and believe that you're authentic and that you do what you say you're going to do and you're respectful, it kind of grows and snowballs, and I think that's really important.
Can I ask you a sensitive question?
Oh. don't know.
No, it's about the reward, about the money that you give back to
Oh,
the
yep,
community.
sure, yep.
Yeah, how can you get that? Because here in my country, it's still developing, and money is always like the first thing that came as an obstacles if we want to do some programs. So maybe you have another ideas for us to gain the money and maybe do those kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure. I think, so I don't know if you ever get grants from your government or local government area, but what we actually did was cocoon. So yes, we received some funds to run the project. We've kept running the project even though we have no funds, so I'll just put that out there for it. But we're no longer giving prizes. But we cocooned some of that money because at the time, and I'm not sure how it was in Indonesia, obviously, but a lot of our small businesses in our small rural communities were just financially going under because nobody was allowed out. So it was partly to try and recognize that and put something back into that local community that we did that. So we quite deliberately and strategically cocooned that money for that reason, to help the kids. So we could have easily spent it and not given any prizes, but we deliberately did that.
Yeah, thank God. Thank God you can deliver that. So is there any questions from the audience here and in the Zoom? Is it okay if you stay with us a little bit longer, because we haven't
sure, I'm
been
happy.
able to reach Professor Peter? Oh, there's a question. Wait for a second, Susan.
Thank you, Prof. Susan. Hello. I'm very glad that you are here. Okay. It is interesting what you already done about the study motivation and intention of COVID vaccination. And your data showed that people who drank alcohol has higher motivation to get COVID vaccination. What is the possible explanation about that? And also, the second question is, your data also showed that people who have financially negative effect of the COVID-19, they don't have a higher intention to COVID vaccination. Is this the number is also the same with the non-farmer community? Since your study is in farmer community, what is there any different or trend about the number? Okay, thank you.
Good. That's a good question. So we didn't divide them into farming, non-farming. We did divide people into essential workers, non-essential workers, and what was interesting to us was about 50% of people that came through considered themselves essential workers. So they may have been transport drivers, farmers, nurses, ambulance people, health professionals. So there was actually no difference between essential and non-essential workers for motivation to be vaccinated, which was surprising. The financial impact was surprising to us. I guess what it showed us was that we possibly could have predicted to some extent that there would be pushback about those people that really didn't want to get vaccinated being financially incentivized wasn't going to make a difference to them being vaccinated. And that was important because a lot of us thought that it would. It did become, and I'm not sure what happened in Indonesia, and I would like to ask you that question too. What, like, was it mandated for people to become vaccinated if they worked in health? So clearly at the hospital, we were all mandated. So people lost their jobs in Australia if they weren't double vaccinated. and people did lose their jobs. So the financial incentive of having work wasn't enough to get some people over the line. And the question about alcohol is a good question. We wondered whether that was because people felt more comfortable or may have been happy, more risk-taking in terms of putting things in their bodies, so that having a vaccine wasn't seen as necessarily putting something bad in your body, given that they were happy to consume alcohol, that maybe people that consume alcohol are more comfortable with the level of risk anyway, given that, the vaccines were fairly new. That was kind of the only way we could really interpret that. But can I ask you a question, if Peter's not there yet? Like, was vaccine mandated in Indonesia if you worked in health, or what were some of the challenges?
Yeah, it is.
Yep. Okay.
We need those vaccine certificates to travel from place to places, so it's kind of pushing the community to do it, but not really regarding to the incentive straight, but in a different level. Yes, it is. Dr. Erma, is that answer your question? Yeah, it's also my questions actually. Why the alcohol? But then you answer it, and yeah, it makes sense. Is there any other questions? No sign from Professor Peter yet? Any other questions? No more questions. I always love when you share us the mental health, because fortunately in this campus I also joined the comedy for mental health, and I found it people are still kind of ignoring those things. It's like a hidden problem. It's like an iceberg phenomenon. So you always came up with things that I didn't really thought about before. What is it again? The COVID cooking? What did you do there? Like you're cooking together with the community?
So people would be trying new recipes and then sharing them on Facebook or Instagram. There was quite a movement around making sourdough bread for the first time because people were housebound. They had time to grow the kind of the mother dough. Yeah. And so there was quite a bit of interest in people doing that for the first time. I'm not sure, and I'd really be interested too just to hear some of the reflections from Jemba. People became far more avid gardeners here, so everybody was putting in seeds and veggie gardens and growing things when previously they may not have had the time or been at home enough to do that. So garden supplies ran out of stocks and seed and a whole lot of things just for people doing stuff in their own garden. It was quite an interesting phenomena. A lot of people took up knitting for women anyway, and crafting, and reading books again. So that was another one. It was very interesting in that regard.
Yeah, actually, I also did that, Professor.
Did you? Yeah.
The first time in years.
Yeah. And Wordle, has anyone, do you do Wordle over there?
Wordle? I don't think so.
So Wordle is I guess it's in English, but it's a word a day that you have to guess, and you get 6 goes, and then you can share it. I should find a link, you might enjoy that. But it originated from someone who was separated from their partner, trying to give somebody something to cheer them up every day. It actually came out of the UK, but just fun, and you can share it with family and other people, and it was just another way of connecting, I think. Good fun stuff.
But it gets better already there, right? hope so.
Yeah, we're not in lockdown anymore, but still people are dying of it. It's obviously we're now coming out of winter and going into summer, so we're all pretty excited about that. But it will be interesting, and Peter would be interesting to know too, how Europe is, Europe's going into winter. So what is their expectation there of what's going to happen to COVID? Like, yeah.
I got it. So for the committee, is there any information about Professor Peter?
There's the Wordle link anyway, if anyone wants to have a go while you're waiting for Peter. Just put it into those.
I never heard about that, Professor. Maybe you should share me the link later on.
Yeah, I've just popped it into the chat. Can you see it in the chat?
Okay. Got it.
So people can pop it on their phones, and if you don't do it within the first 24 hours, you can't do it the next day. So it goes after 24 hours, you get a new word.
Okay.
Something for you all to share.
The things that difference between your country and our country is the limitations to get an internet access here. So it's not that easy to do what you've done there.
Okay.
Yeah. So we need to be maybe more creative and find ways to help them, but still less contact.
Yeah.
Yeah, those kind of stuff. Okay. Susan, thank you for staying with me over the time.
That's okay.
Okay. If you still want to join us, I would love to have you around. But if there's anything you can do, you can leave the Zoom meeting. Thank you so much. I wish we can meet offline as soon as possible. Best regard for your husband too.
Yes, thank you. I will pass on in regards, and all the best to yours. I do have to leave now for a while. I might try and pop back in tomorrow though.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome,
I hope
Susan.
Peter turns up. Has he turned up?
It's good. He's good.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Is Professor Peter already with us? Okay. Due to the obstacles that one of the speakers had, unfortunately, Professor Peter couldn't join with us this afternoon. I really hope we can make it up to all the other participants. Maybe we can share the PowerPoint with Professor Peter if he already confirmed, or maybe we can share it other times with the other participants. Thank you so much for your kindly attentions and for the questions. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam Agromedis.
Once more, please give a big applause for our speaker.
Thank you so much for Dr. Laxmi, and before we end this great time with Dr. Laxmi, please let us to give a certificate. To the committee, please share the is for Dr. Laxmi. To the committee, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Laxmi, for guiding the plenary lecture very well. Once more, thank you to our speaker, to Dr. Emil Elistianto Dardak, also Professor Kelly J. Donham, and Professor Susan Alice Bramby. We're very sorry because Professor Peter Lundquist can join us in this afternoon.
Also, thank to Dr. Laxmi for guiding today's plenary session.
Before we step on to the next agenda, we inform all participants and audience to fill out the attendance list. Please access attendance G form on Zoom chat because it is a requirement to achieve your e-certificate.
Next agenda is lunch break. All participants and audience, please rejoin the Zoom at 1 p.m. Indonesia West Time.
For all oral presentation participants, please prepare yourselves and rejoin the Zooms with following condition. Participants with the topic Tropical Diseases and Agricultural Health to join the Room A with Dr. Irawan Fajar Kusuma, Master of Science, Specialist in Internal Medicine.
Participants with the topic Emerging Disease to join the breakout on Room B with Dr. Al Munawir, Master of Health, PhD. And for all audience are welcome to join breakout room to listen to the participant oral presentation.
Thus, the end of our duties as Master of Ceremony. We apologize for any mistakes that might make you uncomfortable in this session.
Once again, we would like to thank to all guests and all sponsors who have supported this event.
This activity will continue tomorrow. For all oral presentation participants and all audience, we remind you to always join the series of the 4th Icatd.
Thank you and see you in an hour.
Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam Agromedis.